Rob Bertini, and on behalf of Jennifer Dill and myself and the Center for Transportation Studies, pleased to welcome you to our Friday Transportation Seminar. We're here every Friday. We're live on the web. We take questions from our viewers in webland, as Jennifer says. And today we're very pleased to welcome Sam Seskin from Parsons, Brinckerhoff, and he's going to be talking about the PLACE3S planning method and software, a system that I learned a little bit about on a visit to their office over a year ago. And so we've finally scheduled Sam to come and visit us. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I was worried I was here at 5 of and none of you were. And I thought, well, you probably know more than I. But so we're here. Thanks. And Rob said for me to tell you something about myself. And I said that was a different talk I'd have to give. Am I powered up here? Got the light on? Yeah, okay. Happily, I don't have to listen to myself on the speaker. So I've lived here in Portland for 12 years, and I grew up back east. I call it the old country, back east in Massachusetts. And so I'm another white face that moved to Oregon to sort of populate the state. And I'm a planner by training, also have some background in economics. And most of my work life has been in the consulting field, but I spent 10 years at the University of Massachusetts, running a research center there. So I have an affinity for things academic, and that's why it's great to have a chance to come and talk with you all today. I want to ask you how many of you are GIS literate here, because this is about GIS, and this help me sort of decide how to pitch this thing. Yeah, I mean, you've all had a basic course in ArcView, right? You can't get into PSU without taking that, I don't think, right? Can't get out. Okay. Okay. All right, well, if you've gone much past the basic course, you know more than I do, but do not embarrass the speaker. That's not politically correct. So save your hard questions for afterwards when the streaming video stops, okay? So, and I'm glad to be part of thousands of Portland area homes today who I'm sure are tuned in to watch this presentation, because we here in Portland, believe strongly in land use planning. I mean, it's a solution to everything, all of our problems, including world peace, homeland security, and everything else. So we're going to talk today about PLACE3S software. It's an acronym that I'll explain, but really by the time we're done, I'm sure we'll have solved all the world's problems. So today I want to talk with you about some application work that we've done with ArcView. And for those of you who are interested in the applications of GIS, this is pretty much the bleeding edge. We're not unique out there. We're not the only ones bleeding, but we're doing some applications of it both programmatically and then in terms of the way we involve people in the planning process that I think are kind of neat. I want to give you a couple examples of that. And I want to talk a little bit at the end about the use of this kind of tool in the planning process to go beyond the pure mechanics of how we use it into why I think it works and where I think it doesn't work. So most of you are familiar with the standard sort of planning charrette environment in which people mill around a table. There's a pile of maps in the middle, and they get crayons or chips or squares or whatever it is, bottle caps, whatever they want to play with, to put houses and jobs down on a map. Have all of you experienced this one way, shape, or form? So what we're doing with GIS is not only to serve as digital scribes for these events, but also to provide feedback on the impacts or performance or consequences of land use plans live for the people as they create them, so that they can work better, smarter, faster, produce more interesting, more useful ideas. And I want to take you through that process a little bit. Boy, I didn't expect to jump into this as fast, but I'm pretty good at ad-libbing. I thought we had something laid out a little differently. I want to go back for a second here and see if I can do this without screwing up, which I've just succeeded in doing. Jump way down fast here, I thought. Yeah, it did, didn't it? We should be on the second slide, not on the umpteenth slide here. So let's go back a little bit here. This is where I want to be. Okay, God, that's a vivid green. That's sort of, wow. I got 4 different versions of that color here, depending on which screen you look at. So the point I'm trying to make with this graphic is as follows. GIS is a fascinating planning tool, but it exists in a context. It doesn't work in a vacuum. And it does all kinds of measurement and quantification. And when you use it effectively, especially when you engage the public with it, you're involved in a planning process. And that process is, by definition, in the land use side, involved with urban design and the use of land in urban or rural places. So we have a software application, but we also have it nested in a planning process by which we take people through the creation and evaluation of alternatives. And the software PLACES, the acronym stands for Planning, PLA, for Community, Economic, Environmental, and Energy Sustainability. So that's why there's the little 3 next to the E's. PLACES. And it basically is a way of introducing people to the toolkit of smart growth policies, such as mixing land uses, linking land use and transportation, using infrastructure, transportation infrastructure efficiently, consuming energy efficiently, and the like. What we've done is to develop an ArcView application at 2 different geographic scales, one a neighborhood scale and one a regional scale. And the difference is that when we work at what we call the neighborhood scale, we're working at the parcel level. We're thinking about things at the parcel level, so we're drawing typically from assessor's data or some other GIS layer that provides parcel level information on what's going on the ground. When we work at the regional scale, parcels become problematic because there's so many, so we'll work with some kind of larger polygons, transportation or traffic analysis zones, census tracts, or any other things that we and the client work out so that people can deal with the numbers of geographic units more reasonably. Okay, so now you get the happy faces of the people at the workshop here. So, God, I think it still skipped one. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go back here. It's done this to me twice. I can't understand why it skips things.
They're eliminated.
Oh, they are, aren't they? Boy, I didn't notice that when I prepped this thing. There you go. Do your homework, students, before you come with a presentation. Okay. Okay, so the first place I'm going to talk about is an application in the San Francisco Bay region. There are 9 counties that are part of the metropolitan planning area for San Francisco. And we worked as part of a team a year or 2 ago to undertake a project called the Livability Footprint, which I've always found a kind of funny title. I sort of imagine that Sasquatch sort of marching through the Bay Area, slapping down his big feet all over the earth, and little, mixed-use development sprouting where he walked. But anyway, what we did is convene workshops in each of the 9 counties in the San Francisco region and brought people together in more or less a traditional charrette environment, actually finding up to 200 people attending these workshops. Their goal was to envision their county in the future and to accommodate the growth that was forecast. And I want to give you an idea of how that process actually works. And in order to do that, I want to show you this map. This is Sonoma County. And what we start with is various layers of GIS information, which we overlay as a base map, and then enable people to work with the different polygons on the map and apply different place types to them. We created these polygons by looking at aerial photos, looking for homogeneous land uses. And in this case, by homogeneous, what I mean is land uses that are consistent in the area. Homogeneity may be defined as a highway strip 7 miles long, which has nothing but neon signs. At least it's all of the same kind of land use. Or it might be quite a diverse neighborhood with stores, offices, and homes. But in any case, wanted to create places that had a consistent character. I actually had to map these out from aerial photos. This is an example of the games that we had to play looking for ways to do that. And what we allow people to do and empower them to do is to envision how those places might change in the future. We have a menu of place types, of which I'm going to illustrate several for you here. And they have, in each case, a photo and a name or a number and a verbal description and a quantitative description. So residential 1E would be single-family detached houses at a certain density, which they can identify in a lookup table. Mixed use, there'd be a whole range of mixed uses at different densities, a range of town centers at different densities. The one before was a little less dense in employment terms than this one. These illustrations will always draw from the local communities. more concentrated employment or office development and so forth. So the game that people play, and they're not looking at a screen when they do it, is that they apply these place types to the polygons or planning areas on the county map in front of them. And typically what happens in a workshop is that people create these alternatives, and the planners roll up the maps and take them home and back to the office, actually, and they work on them for a couple of weeks, and they'll report back 2 weeks later. Folks, you might be interested in what you did. You know, you drew a map and you accommodated so many houses and so many jobs, and then they'll ask, let's begin to compare and contrast how these behave or how they perform. With GIS, we can speed up that process. So in this case, one table worked on applying various town center place types to the different polygons in their county. They're working steadily at this. They apply these place types 3C and 3D to a bunch of these counties, and they're curious as to how many jobs and houses they'll have in those places when they're fully built out under the constraints of that zoning category. So we can provide that feedback instantly for them using the simple power of ArcView, and they can compare what they've done against the forecast levels of housing and employment that the region foresees for the county to see whether they've accommodated their share or more than their share as the county or the regional planners see it. So we have housing targets which we ask everyone to try to hit. Nobody wants growth in San Francisco, and so we're asking them to try to come up with some way that they can live with growth, and by applying place types to these planning areas, they can get feedback as to whether they've come at all close to accommodating the growth that will be occurring. Of course, you can do that for employment as well as households. And having done that once, you might learn that you hadn't quite reached your goal. You want to accommodate more houses or jobs. So you'll go back into the place types, and the ones highlighted in yellow here are places where you might want to accommodate accessory apartments in addition to all the jobs that you'd created by putting those mixed-use place designations down on a map. And then you can query the GIS analyst at the table as to how many new housing units you'd accommodated. And in scenario 2, the bar on the right, you see that you've accommodated another, I don't know what, 10 or 20,000 housing units by enabling those places to build or accommodate accessory dwellings and build out under that density. And you hadn't changed the number of jobs because all you did was add accessory apartments, so the job totals for your scenario stay the same. Those are pretty straightforward functions in ArcView. In addition, we've developed some that are a little less straightforward, and I can illustrate those by talking about water consumption. ArcView doesn't know anything about water consumption, but we can build in a simple spreadsheet that makes water consumption a function of the density of residential dwellings and or the numbers of employees that are accommodated in a zone. And using that formula, we can estimate the water consumption in any combination of zones or places. And you can compare or contrast that with other scenarios in which housing, because it's more compact, might require less water for lawns, for example. And in some places, not typically in Oregon, those are big planning issues. So the science, as I call it, behind a lot of these indicators would be the research that we and others do on the way people's land use decisions affect resources. So on the one hand, where dwelling units near transit is a pretty straightforward GIS buffering kind of a function, we also can calculate, I'm going to jump along here a little bit, a whole variety of different simple buffer functions. We can also talk about how many people might get on a bus or a train. And I'm not finding that graphic, which is humbling, but I can ad-lib around it and say that when people's use of transit depends on residential density, for example, which a lot of research suggests it does, we can wire a formula with an elasticity into the program so that once the densities have been applied to the places, we can estimate how that might affect ridership at transit stations. Anyway, to bring this one of my two examples to a close, I can say that in 9 different counties, about 1,000 or 2 people gathered in these planning charrettes and went through this exciting experience. And by their body language, I think you'd certainly have agreed with this. Very engaging experience in which they were learning very quickly about the consequences of the land use plans that they envisioned for their communities. And they'd be presenting these to plenary sessions where someone would just pull a disk out of the machine, bring it up to the central laptop and plug it in and say, we've just created a map that looks like this, and what we found is if we change the zoning in this part of our county from this to this, we could have the following consequences. Some of these are good and some of these are bad. So the learning process speeds up a lot. A more localized application of the same thing is in Sacramento, and that's the photo here. It makes our urban growth boundary look sort of sloppy by comparison, but this is part of the Central Valley, and you look across and see downtown Sacramento. Anyway, when we did our work there, we focused at the neighborhood level, which means at the parcel level. And we started with one transit station, the 65th Street station, which is circled in the center on the left on the screen there. We've since broadened this exercise, still at the parcel level, to the whole metropolitan area. And now there are dozens of workshops going on in the greater Sacramento region in which neighbors are getting together to envision the future for their region in land use terms and using this software to speed up their learning process. So I'm just going to talk about one station, but there are many parts of the community that aren't on train at all and are still going through a similar exercise. So at this 65th Street station, we have a traditional base map which shows parcels, and the legend in the upper left, which you won't be able to read, has the various zoning classifications that apply to those parcels today. To give you an idea of how the ArcView application works, what we have underlying the screen is, in addition to the layers of GIS data, a series of screens, of which I'll illustrate two, where planners in advance of the workshops enter key data that people will need in order to understand the impacts of their land use plans. One of these screens we call Global Development Assumptions, and it's illustrated here in part by showing you that behind these zoning designations is information on costs that might be associated with developing or redeveloping any particular parcel for this use. So we have a whole development, real estate development pro forma built into the background here in the ArcView application, which enables anyone to evaluate the economic feasibility of a use at the parcel level. You can understand why that wouldn't work very well at the polygon level, because you really need to understand the specifics of the parcel and the zoning that applies there in order to do any kind of real estate analysis. But at the parcel level, you have this powerful opportunity. So as people envision things parcel by parcel, they can not only add up how many houses and jobs, or how much water gets consumed, or how much energy gets consumed, but they can also test the feasibility of that real estate venture. And different iterations of this have come along now. Actually, I can show you how it maps out at the end. So in addition to the development assumptions, we have a series of zoning assumptions. Those are all the detailed specifications in the zoning ordinance about required setbacks, requirements for parking, number of stories, construction materials, and so forth. So all of this information has to be prepared and entered by analysts before the workshop, but it provides all the rich data from which the real estate analysis can be undertaken. So let's imagine that we want to change the land use and we want to apply a certain kind of office transit-oriented development, as that's defined in this specific community, to a specific parcel. So in ArcView mode, we click on the parcels, we paint them a different color that corresponds to this use, and behind that all of the data is arrayed and waiting. And what we can find out by the click of a button is whether that particular use on those parcels is economically viable, and the red color indicates that it is. And there are other uses that were mapped onto other parcels here. We've also subsequently modified the way this is done so that it isn't a binary choice of yes, no, but it displays a return on investment to indicate how attractive a use it is, because clearly there's no binary answer to that question from the private side. So let's see what's next here. We actually can save the land use plan, give it a name, and then select several land use plans that we might have worked on at our table and identify the indicators that we're interested in evaluating and comparing. And just to illustrate the variety of ideas which citizens brought forth, here are 6 different ideas that were evaluated, one of them being existing uses, the others focusing on either scenarios very rich in employment or in other cases scenarios very rich in households or balances of both, big box retail versus street front retail and so forth. So these are the scenarios that people at different tables worked up, and they can all be quietly translated by the GIS analyst sitting at the table with a computer as people undertake their maps. All the other work is being done digitally to record and then help them evaluate things. Once again, you can compare and contrast for here 6 different alternatives, the total number of dwellings, and jobs. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, I hope. Here's my one of my science indicators. We actually have developed a formula for how vehicle miles of travel vary in communities as a function of residential and employment densities. So applying this formula, which to be sure is the result of national research, to this specific situation, we're suggesting how people might travel and how far they might have to travel if they were living in a built environment that had a certain mix of houses and jobs that might be more or less dense than the one that they're in now. VMT indicators are very popular to all the planning geeks, although most citizens don't even know what the acronym means. Rail boardings I've already explained to you, again driven by a national regression model that we developed for all the light rail systems in the United States, looking at how boardings on light rail stations were a function of employment and household densities along the corridor, holding a lot of other things constant, which probably isn't realistic. Anyway, here's a sampling of the array of indicators which we've developed and we're always developing to use in citizen workshops. Again, some of them are very basic, ArcView math, and others are richer, more sophisticated or nuanced discussions of things that matter to people having to do with energy or travel behavior or environmental quality. And so I'm going to sum up here by suggesting to you that this kind of an application of GIS, which all of you are trained to do, can support community planning process, the community planning process. And we've found this to be very engaging, very successful. We're very proud of the projects that we've done with this. So yes, I'm boasting here. People are able to visualize the alternatives through such things as the illustrations of residential and commercial development types. And they're able to understand the impacts of their community evolving in one or another land use direction more quickly and I think better than they could in other kinds of planning environments. We think that as a result of this, people can more quickly come to consensus about the kinds of land uses that they'd like in their communities, and they can do this by referring to actual facts, or at least we're representing that these are facts, rather than conjecture about the consequences of different kinds of development in their communities. That said, the downside of using this technology is also fairly apparent to us after working with this for several years now. It certainly speeds up the learning process, but it also throws a lot of information at citizens. I mean, we've got dozens of indicators that are available, and most people who don't spend their lives in land use planning workshops get a rush off of being there, but then quickly can get overwhelmed with the amount of information that's presented and then trying to sort it out, particularly when we're trying on a Saturday morning in July to get them to deal with something as cosmic as the future of their entire county. And while planners' minds run well and easily in those directions, most people's minds don't run that way. And it is a big leap, and one that I don't think those of us who do workshops, whether we use technology or not, it's a big leap to ask people to engage at that level, particularly at a very large geographic scale. Most people's ideas of where they belong, of what their communities mean to them spatially, don't tend to be as broad geographically as some of the planning areas that the planners want them to engage in. So we, I think, can try to do too much and try to do it too fast in citizen workshops alone. That's where we've been doing this because it's just so engaging. But after 2 or 3 years of this, we've reached a point where it seems to us that this technology might reside better in the offices of professional planners who could use it as a decision support system. And by that we mean something that they'd refer to more often than once a year in a planning workshop. Something that they can work together around or with and begin to envision changes or evaluate specific zoning proposals or development proposals that come before them, and then know that they can also take it out to the public. So we're looking for opportunities in the communities where we work as consultants to plant this, in the offices of planners, much as travel demand forecasting models have become something that you'll find in most planning offices today. This kind of a land use tool is also something that I think probably 5 or 10 years from now will be more commonly embedded in planning offices to evaluate development proposals, to kick around ideas as part of regional planning processes. I've left in the back of the room a list of websites that you can check out. These websites include some that provide an overview of many planning tools like Places, and others that are about individual planning tools like CommunityViz or Index. And again, you can pick up a copy of this when you leave. If you haven't already, there's a pile of them next to Mr. Bertini at the door. And you can get a better idea by looking at them exactly how these have been used, and take your time to go through what I've had to do pretty hastily. I think I've covered everything, and in fact, I have. So let me at this point open up to questions either about the use of the technology or about the planning process, or anything that I can answer for you. I hate to stare at this. I'm just going to put a picture up here so I don't have to stare at a screen like that. Yes, sir.
I saw on one of your slides a photo of a workshop. One of your slides had a photo of kind of some facilitator or somebody sitting at a computer.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions. At your workshops, is there always a computer there, and whether or not there is or not,
Yeah.
do you find it more difficult because you're using technology that the facilitator has to be somebody really trained and skilled in what the technology?
Well, those of us who are infatuated with the technology think that that should be the absolute center of people's attention, but in fact it's quite the opposite. It really needs to stay in the background. It's meant to be an aid to learning. It's not meant to be, like a DVD player running in the middle of the table. So we've regularly run workshops at which there have been 8 to 12 people at a table with a person who is taking ArcView notes. There's also a facilitator, and they're different. So the facilitator is focusing on the process. Gee, what did you mean by that? Does everybody understand? Where do you want to put that land use on this map? And we usually have forms that we train the facilitator to fill out every now and then and just hand off to the digital scribe so that he or she can be taking those notes digitally and be on call. And then they'll reach a point where they need a break or they have a question, so they'll turn to the ArcView analyst and say, can you tell us how many houses we've accommodated, or how much water we've used, or how much energy we're using on average? And that's when the person will do the electronic wizardry. We also have developed a version of this which is web-based rather than desktop-based. And so even though there are desktops or laptops present at the tables, the hookups are much expedited, where we actually run up to 10 laptops off of a cell phone, dial a dial-up modem, and import the software from a common server in California. So we get over the need to have 20 ArcView licenses in the room in order to do the planning. Finding people who want to be ArcView scribes, it requires a little effort. Typically, we work with planners, sometimes citizen volunteers, but mostly we recruit planners from the community. Say, hey, we need 10 people this Saturday. We can train you in an hour to run the software, folks. If you know ArcView, it's no big deal. They really just do the scribe thing. They don't necessarily have time to think about anything else. Yes?
I was just wondering, I don't know how long the software has been in operation, but
2 or 3 years.
Okay, have you had an opportunity to do any checks to see how accurate the information that it imparts might be? For instance, on the real estate performa that you were looking at, I mean,
Really
that
good
has so
question.
many variables in itself.
Right.
What's your level of accuracy?
Well, it's a very broad question, and few planners face it honestly, I mean, with any modeling system, and I'm sure you've thought about that in your courses. when we have science indicators here rather than just math indicators like how many houses are there, we will have available documentation that explains where we drew our data from. And typically that's national data. It's built on national relationships. So when we say if you double the density in your neighborhood, VMT will go down by 7%, all we're asserting is that on average, based on other places around the country, this is what we've observed. Or if you have a built environment that looks like this, your BTUs per household will drop from this to this. Once again, you know, we haven't actually gone back and monitored anybody's construction to see whether they put the right insulation in the walls and whether they actually wanted to look and run another model of how many BTUs were on their monthly bills. We don't do that. We have looked back after 2 or 3 years and seen decisions that have been made as a result of these workshops. We've seen communities come to consensus about what kinds of land uses they like. We've seen some of that development occur. But we haven't gotten to the point where we're monitoring or evaluating how many people are getting on the train in comparison to what we thought. We'd love to get there, and people like you are going to go out and do all those studies for us. So, yes?
How does the PLACE3S technology help low-income communities who don't have access to computers?
Good question. We faced this squarely in the Bay Area because one of the key issues in the Bay Area study was housing affordability and the willingness of most communities in the greater San Francisco region to address that at all in their plans. As far as finding the digital scribes, that's not that big a deal. We've had planners and citizens volunteer to be trained in this and to bring it back to less affluent neighborhoods who want to undertake the workshops. I think the real challenge still remains, which is when and how you can engage people in some neighborhoods in this kind of planning process. Some people like to sit around and draw maps. Some people don't deal with spatial information well. And there's always self-selection that goes on. You're not going to come to one of these workshops to discuss the future of your neighborhood if you don't feel comfortable sitting around with a bunch of other people who may be a lot more verbal than you, or who may have much more intuitive abilities with maps than you. So there are limits, clearly, to what you can expect from a charrette. Again, the technology is background. As far as the policy issues involved, though, what we have done is adopted the software to generate information as to how well a community's plan accommodates low and moderate income housing. So by building the database behind this, by taking a look at the costs of the units that are going to get built, for example, and the incomes of the people who are either in the area today or who are likely to be in the area in the future, we can provide indicators, that's what we call them, performance measures or indicators, that say, gee, you might be interested to know that the plan that you've mapped here does a very good job or a very bad job at providing affordable housing. So we have affordable housing indicators, which, if that's an issue that's important to you as a citizen, we can give you feedback about. How well that actually, gets translated into implementation is always a good question. It's just as true of affordable housing as it is about energy consumption or farmland preservation. Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of following up on a couple of these previous questions, but I'm curious how you set it up then, when you come into a workshop, how you set it up, how well you kind of describe how tenuous this is in a way, and how it's just kind of maybe giving an idea of orders of magnitude or
right.
The direction of change,
right.
rather
right.
than, because I know when you see things and when things are so visually based, there's just such a tendency to attach to that and attach that as the truth or fact.
Right.
And so I'm curious how you set that up as facilitators, and also if you've going into the Sacramento area or the Bay Area, if you've been able to partner with more community-based organizations there
yes.
to kind of leave some of this capability in
yeah.
these areas rather than kind of coming in and out as a larger company.
Well, of course, we're consultants sitting up here in Oregon, and when we work in another region, we have that problem. So to go to the second question first, I think we can say, yes, we've left this software with the local agencies, the neighborhoods. We don't shrink wrap or license or sell the software. It's a planning tool that we've developed. That said, unless you're an ArcView literate person, you aren't going to use it. And even if you are an ArcView literate person, you may not succeed in using it because it's not the most beautifully documented thing in the world. So that's definitely an issue. The first question I can answer as follows. I've been worried for many years as a professional planner about the results of models and how people interpret them, and that's why I call these indicators. And when we're organized, we present that very clearly to everyone involved. These are indicators, and frankly, I think I can say our clients, typically planners or elected officials, are the ones who are pushing here for precision, which for the most part is false precision. And I wish, instead of putting numbers on this, we just have ordinal rankings or bar charts. And this is most problematic, in practice, it's most problematic around the issue of travel behavior. Because a lot of what drives this kind of planning is a concern about air quality and automobile dependence. And frankly, so that funds a whole lot of these applications. And we don't have a regional travel model built in here to run a simulation. Even if we did, we know how frail those are in terms of their predictive capabilities. These are about 3 orders of magnitude weaker. And yet, people want to know the answer about how many cars there are going to be on Main Street if we permit this kind of development. And so we do have a VMT indicator. I wish it were ordinal, but we're constantly challenged. And I've already given you my response, which is if someone asks a question that's as thoughtful as yours, I say, I can give you a technical paper that says what the science was and where it was peer reviewed. And that's what we base this indicator on. But folks, it's an indicator. But you're really on a key issue as far as I'm concerned about this. And another one of sort of Seskin's rules here is that you can usually get a rough idea of impacts pretty quickly. And you'll spend most of your time trying to refine that to the point where you have confidence in it to the second or third statistical, to the second or third significant digit. And I think it's an insight that may come as you get older, but after a while you realize that these issues are so cosmic, you'd be happy to have 1 significant digit worth of accuracy and to have people pay attention to that. And you can throw the rest of it away because the real issue is no one pays attention to the facts, even at 1 significant digit. Because facts are, if it's not what they want to hear, they just put it aside. And as a person who spends a lot of time trying to bring good information into the planning process, I'm very frustrated and worried about the tendency we have toward false precision and the amount of time that we spend and the public's money that we spend striving for that precision, when if we put it into building consensus, might actually produce something of lasting value other than just model output. Sorry for that sermon. Yes?
I was thinking that one of the most valuable things you'd get out of a workshop is not so much the plans that people who aren't even trained as planners come up with, but rather how they react to the indicators when you present them.
Yes.
If you have a whole room full of people who are really reacting strongly to
Yes.
VMT, then that tells you that this is a region that really cares about VMT.
Yes.
And if you have a whole room full of people really reacting strongly to high density scenarios and saying that they really don't want these sorts of density
Right.
coming out of your indicators, that what you really learned from that workshop is that, well, we really shouldn't be trying to put high density in here because these
Right.
are the types of people who don't want this.
Right.
So I was thinking
Right.
as you were speaking that what you really want to try to record out of these workshops is not necessarily the plans that these people come up with, since they aren't even planners and don't really know what they're doing. But what you maybe really want to know...
You didn't mean it quite that way. That's all right.
What you really want to know from the citizens is what's important to them. And
Right.
so how would you document the range of reactions or the intensity of their reactions at the end of one of these workshops?
Well, it isn't hard to document their reactions. Your good point to me is that we don't always take care to. I mean, to document reactions, you'd need the recorder at the table to say, we were here for 4 hours at this table, and we spent 3 of them talking about parks and recreation. And in the end, we've got a map for you here, but the real takeaway message might be, pay attention to the parks, guys. And so it's not hard to record that message and to put it into the record or whatever. The question is, who's listening? And in the real world of planning, most of these workshops are set up, and I'm sure you can imagine, carefully orchestrated because there's only so much time and everything has to be rehearsed. We've got to move people through a complex series of tasks in a short period of time. And often they're done because somebody has an idea going in about what it is that they want to get. I mean, planners and elected officials, in this business are usually leading, and typically they're leading with the conventional wisdom that what we want is mixed use, transit-oriented, walkable communities. We already have the answer, folks. Now we're going to run a workshop in which we expect you will confirm our wisdom. And I'm pretty tired of that. I've been at it for 25 years, and yet so often going in, that really is what happens. So an honest exercise that technology could support would be one in which people are playing around with this kind of thing, and in which they come out with their own lessons, and in which planners and elected officials actually pay attention to that. Does that happen? Yes, it certainly does happen. It's a different kind of learning, and sometimes in our workshops people pay attention to that and sometimes they don't. And actually the elected officials probably pay better attention to it than the planners do. Yeah, because they're really tuned to the sort of gestalt of the situation. What are people saying in general here? And they're not hung up about what parcel you painted with 3D. They just want to get a sense, how many people showed up today and what do I hear them chatting about at the tables? And that would be true whether or not you had GIS technology there. So, you'd like to think that happens. And yes, we run a lot of workshops where elected officials come and mill around and are looking for those cues, and there are also ones where they don't. Yeah.
I'd like to come back to that too. That I think that's so important to be listening for those interests, but that at the same time, like we were just saying earlier, that these are a fairly self-selected crowd, and if you take that and generalize it too much as like this is what this region wants or this is what this area wants, I think then you also get in trouble.
Right. Right. It's dangerous to generalize. So if you're infatuated with the technology, then you'd probably be a person who believes, as some of my colleagues do, that by having this available on the web, you can play planner in your living room, and I'm sure that there are people who do. I mean, the state of California, who has underwritten a lot of the R&D that produced this program, has a website which sooner or later will be finished, and will enable anybody to dial up and say, I'm from the city of Merced. I would like information of the following kinds in GIS form. I'm going to download it I'm uploading to your server. I'm going to see the information and work with it on the server, and I'm going to create a land use plan for my community. And you'll be able to do this within a matter of months for a large part of the state of California. So if you're GIS literate, and if you operate at a high level of quantitative aptitude, you can play planner at home, and you can walk back to your planning commission and say, last night I was sitting around at home playing with places, and here's what I discovered. If you take this corridor and you develop it this way, here are some of the benefits. Well, that's totally cool. It really is. How many people, what percentage, what slice of our planet, or even in our Silicon Valley part of the planet, are actually going to do that? It's pretty small. Does that mean it isn't a good idea? No, I think it's a neat idea. And clearly, in a generation, literacy in this way will grow from a tiny slice of a pie to a larger slice of the pie. And the software will get more intuitive and easier to use. And I got to think that on the whole that's good, but it's right now it's pretty esoteric. And it's almost scary to think that that someone will be sitting around playing planner on Saturday night. I mean, I don't. I got a lot of other things I'd rather do. That's because I deal with this for the other 50 or 60 hours of my week. Yes, Rob.
A couple of questions by email, some of which you've already answered, so I'll skip to the ones you haven't. Although maybe you've touched on this, several people have asked about whether, and these are clearly people who want to try this, I think. Are there, so if you ran a charrette in this room, I mean, we would all want to start changing the assumptions in the little indicators, right? So do you have or have you thought about incorporating a place to look at, and this is maybe my interpretation of this question, but look at a distribution of impacts on VMT, for example, instead of just saying there's one number. So could you look at a high and a low or something like that?
I think we should. I've advocated that. It just we've never focused on producing that. I mean, we should do that in all of our technical work. That's this whole false precision question. I think I've tried to articulate my feelings about that, and my thoughts about that to you. I think we're just way overboard in this, and we ought to be offering a range. We, meaning those of us in academia or in the consulting professions, ought to be honest about uncertainty. And there's period, end of subject. That's the only right way to be. We haven't enabled someone in this software to change that assumption easily. By that assumption, I mean, for example, the elasticity of VMT in response to density. That, we can say what science we relied on, but we don't have that as a user-specified option. You can change all kinds of things about your zoning, but you can't change those assumptions right now, but it's a good thing to do. Good questions. You got another?
One more question here.
There aren't hundreds?
Well, there are about 6. Some of them you've already answered.
It's about 5
Some
more
of
than I
them are from
expected.
one person. So.
Oh, okay.
How does PLACES compete with or complement other simulation modeling GIS efforts such as Klosterman's what-if system?
Yes. The website page that you can pick up has some of these, and probably the site that's called placematters.com actually will probably link you to the 5 or 6 major softwares that are out there that do similar things to PLACES. The tool that this is closest to, and it's quite close, is one called Index, which is also developed by a Portland company. And you have a website for Index. And actually, it's a long story, but there are common intellectual origins to those two applications. There are other software applications that emphasize different things. Community Viz, for example, happens to have a wonderful 3D imaging capability in it that enables citizens to see on a screen from a bird's eye angle what the community looks like once you've applied these different densities and types of land uses. And that's pretty nifty. And they're unique in that. There are others that focus more on large-scale issues and small. Some focus more on small. Some have a strong focus on the environment, some more on the natural environment, some more on the built environment. In all, I'd say there are about half a dozen applications that I'm familiar with that are available for free or commercially. And if you're interested, check out those websites and play around with them, because it's really some neat stuff. Did I answer that question? Okay. How are we doing? You all talked out?
We want to run it, we want to play it.
I know, and the damn thing is, I couldn't do that for you. That's why, I'm just the guy who manages this process. But we've got folks in our shop who could, and if you ever wanted, maybe we can find a time in the context of a classroom or something to bring Larry Conrad back here, who's a PSU grad and who's very facile with the software. And actually, maybe that's a good turning point for me, because part of my interest in telling you about this is I continue to look for sort of institutional homes, where this could become a decision support tool. Ideally, for me as a consultant, I'd love to see that happen in city and county planning commissions. I'm equally interested in seeing it happen at universities, where we could say, let's put a copy of this on the server here, and let you guys use it in classes. Maybe those of you who are so inclined even begin to do some programming applications with it. It's all written in Avenue, and eventually we have to migrate it to VB, but we're scared to death about how to do that. In theory, we are going to have a copyleft opportunity where you can take a public license for this, download it, use it, put back in the public domain any of the enhancements that you might make if you're able to program them in Avenue, and maintain it as a public software. We've been talking about this forever, and the problem is we haven't quite come up with a way to pay for putting it in the public domain and managing it. Putting it in the public domain is actually easy, but managing the process, managing the website, keeping track of the people who are coming and going and what they're posting is something we haven't been able to figure out on the private side. We just haven't been able to endow ourselves well enough to do it. If any of you are interested in that at the institution, it might just be fun to have a lunch and see where, if anywhere, we can go with this, because this is still an open question in my mind as to how or whether we'll succeed at that. Good. You guys have been really patient with me. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all.